This story happened just a few years back when I was visiting an old friend in Cologne, while at the same time taking advantage of him as a free stay for a meeting with my LARP group. For those who don't know what LARP is, it's basically a real-life role-playing game. Imagine a Dungeons and Dragons game, but instead of people sitting around a table with dice, you have people actually dressed up as their characters. LARPing has been a hobby since I was about 14, and after I got a job that paid pretty well, I started to go a bit more all out when it came to this stuff. One of those things I spent a solid amount of money on was my character's armour that consisted of various elements, but most importantly to the story, a chainmail vest that I wore underneath my armour. After the meeting of my group, I got mostly out of my LARP outfit because I really didn't want to walk through Cologne Melheim, which is one of the most dangerous places in the city, as a medieval knight. But since I couldn't fit all of it into my backpack, I kept my chainmail on, as well as my tunic and pants. On the bus ride home, I noticed some guy seemed to have his eye on me, but I guessed it was because I still looked very out of place. When he exited the bus at the same station as me, I didn't really pay much attention. I was almost at my friend's place and decided to call him, asking if we could meet and get a doner kebab, which he agreed to. I arrived at our meeting spot first and waited. Then I noticed the guy from the bus again, who now walked straight towards me. I got closer to the wall to make space, but instead of passing me, he stopped and pulled a knife on me, demanding my bag, wallet and phone. Now I was willing to give him my wallet, but I tried to explain that the bag only had some armour and foam weapons. But it seemed that even just talking was enough to set this guy off, and suddenly I felt 2 fast stinging punches to my stomach. It hurt like hell, and I dropped to the ground as the guy grabbed my bag. Honestly, the next things are not really in my mind. I was barely able to notice anything other than the voice in my head screaming, "You got stabbed." So the next thing I noticed was my friend shaking me. My bag was open and my stuff was all over the place. And he was holding my helmet with blood dripping from it. He said that he saw the guy throwing my stuff from the bag, as it was almost likely too heavy and big for him. So my friend, seeing me on the ground, managed to grab the first thing that he could, which was the helmet, and bashed the guy with it until he ran away. As we got to safety, we checked my stomach, and even though I had 2 giant deep blue bruises, I only had 2 small cuts, since the chainmail stopped the knife itself. Up until this day, I still get sick to my stomach when I think back on what happened that day. I remember that if I had not worn that piece of my LARP clothing, I would most likely be dead. This happened quite a while ago, when I was home alone with just my dog. After all this time, I'm sure what happened was really strange. And while I have no idea what the person wanted, I can only assume the worst. So I was watching TV at night. It was around 11 p.m. when I heard a car pull up outside and the engine shut off. I figured it was obviously a neighbour, but my nosy dog wanted to have a look. And he went to the window. He kinda messed up the blinds when he went to look, so I got up to fix them. And when I did, I noticed the car parked on the street across from my house. I couldn't really make out any details, but it looked like the driver was still sitting in his car. Once again, I really didn't think much of it, and I got a drink and went back to watching TV. Quite a while had passed since I fixed the blinds, but I'm not quite sure how long. I guess about 15 or 20 minutes. Out of nowhere, I thought I heard a tapping at the door. Not a knock. It was much lighter and much more quiet. My dog sat straight up to look at the door. So I paused the TV when the same tapping then began at the window. I opened the blinds just a crack and saw a man standing there. I couldn't make out his face properly. And he immediately walked back to the door and began tapping at it once more. Now, admittedly, this doesn't sound very frightening, and I can't tell you why, but at that moment I had this awful feeling of dread set down right over me. I felt absolutely terrified, and I had no clue as to why. The tapping at the door never stopped, but something in my head said if I opened the door that something really bad was going to happen. I went upstairs to open the window to ask what the person wanted. I felt safer doing this. The man said in a really quiet voice that he was delivering a pizza, and he told me how much it cost. At this moment, I felt a bit stupid for being so frightened about a food delivery, but I told him that I didn't order the pizza. I guess he was speaking quietly and knocking lightly, so he wouldn't disturb my neighbours. My dog had followed me upstairs and was letting out the odd growl and bark, which is really unusual for him. I was doing my best to set my dog, when the man downstairs told me that he indeed had the correct address, and I better get downstairs now and open the door to pay for what I owed him, and collect my food, before it got cold. I was truly confused because I most definitely didn't order any food and began to tell him that when I noticed that he didn't have a pizza in his hand, I told him again that he had the wrong address. And that's when he got really angry and kept telling me to open the door. He was going between angry and sort of trying to persuade me to go back downstairs. I asked him where the pizza was, and he said in a very matter-of-fact, yet agitated, that he was holding it. It was really dark out, but he definitely didn't have anything in his hands. My dog was making quite a bit of fuss at this point, and the stranger had turned into a broken record, come downstairs and opened the door. All the noise must have alerted my neighbour, who did open his front door, and the man didn't say a word, but practically sprinted back across the street to his car. I had no idea what he wanted, but he certainly wasn't a delivery driver. It really freaked me out as well, knowing that my dog is quite obviously a large breed, and the man saw him through the window. Yet he wasn't deterred at all. From whatever he had planned, it seemed even stranger and less random that he actually drove to my house, as though he had planned on showing up. At this point, so far removed from this happening, I'm not sure if I was more frightened or weirded out of what was happening. The idea of having a stranger pull up and attempt to get you to open the door at nearly midnight is certainly creepy to do it under the guise of delivering food, as a means to make it seem like you have a reason to be there, feels even more seedy. I'm glad I had the sense to not even crack the door that evening, and I encourage everyone to be sure who they're opening their doors to before they even think of unlatching that lock. This happened in the early 70s. My family, including my uncle by marriage, were all born and raised in a tiny area in the deep south. This story still gets told at family reunions, and I have full permission by my aunt and uncle to tell it, but I don't feel comfortable revealing any information, such as where we're from. My uncle went away and fought in Vietnam and returned home, and him and my aunt, my dad's older sister, got married while my uncle was in Nam. He said when something bad was going to happen, like something awful to one of his friends over there, or when they were at a bad battle with his company, he could almost feel it. He spoke of there being a sense of dread that would sweep over the entire camp. Sometimes he would have that dread, like a feeling of burden, for a week or so before anything happened. Sometimes it would just be an hour or so, or anywhere in between. So here goes the story. It was January or February, and the weather had been unseasonably warm. My aunt and uncle had only been married for a few months, and my uncle was heading out of town the following day for something job-related, and he was going to be gone for about 2 weeks. He and my aunt were not looking forward to being so apart. It's a Sunday, and they decided to make that a special day. He went to church with her, which was something he rarely did, and they decided to splurge and eat at one of our great seafood restaurants, and then afterwards they were going to take a walk on the beach together. My aunt said that they were having such a great time that day, that they had seen old friends at church. The restaurant was really good, and was just one of them days when everything seemed to be going right. On the way to the beach that they were heading to, my uncle said that he was beginning to have the same sense of dread that he had when he was at war. Although he didn't want to spoil my aunt's fun, he thought that he was having a flashback, or what we now call it, PTSD. He was trying not to take it seriously, but he said the sense of foreboding was particularly bad. They got to the beach, and to explain something about this particular beach, you had to park beside a road and walk across the wide expanse of sand to get to the water. This beach was very secluded, especially at this time of year. My aunt was walking in her stocking feet, collecting shells and having a great time. She loved the beach, and she still does. They saw another young couple walking as well. My aunt and uncle didn't know them, although they seemed like they were in their late teens. Anyway, my uncle said that he couldn't fight that bad feeling any longer. He grabbed my aunt by the arm and said, "We got to get out of here now." She got mad. She wasn't ready to go yet, and he was dragging her across the sand towards their car. As they were arguing the whole way, he didn't tell her what was wrong, because he even felt he was probably having a flashback, but he said he felt 100% better once they were in the car and were heading home. My aunt got over being mad. As they were driving home though, my aunt and uncle both recalled seeing a big car and it had 4 hippie type guys in it as they passed them on the road, and it looked like the big car was heading towards the beach. Fast forward a day, there's a story in the newspaper. My uncle realised why he was having such a bad feeling. Those 4 guys kidnapped the other couple that my uncle and aunt saw on the beach that day. The 4 guys were actually local men, and my aunt and uncle had gone to school with a couple of them. The 4 guys were on some kind of drug binge. They put the guy in the trunk. They took this woman out and assaulted her for hours. They had a gun and kidnapped them from the beach at gunpoint, and this shocked the entire area, because crime like this was nearly unheard of. If my aunt and uncle would have stayed at that beach, there's no telling what would have happened to them. In fact, as terrible as this might sound, I have a feeling in me that both my family members would have been shot that day. My uncle would have fought his hardest to give my aunt a chance to get away. I'm so happy that my uncle listened to his gut and he got himself and my aunt to safety. Thanks a million to everyone who likes, subscribes and comments on my videos. I really appreciate it. If you enjoy these stories, you'll enjoy the stories in the box above. Thank you.